Let me tell you how a single small detail can unravel an entire marriage and expose years of deception. My name is Adam. I'm 35, and I've been married for quite some time to Stephanie, who's 3 years older than me. We're just an ordinary working couple, living together for over a decade. Because of my job, I often have to take long business trips, something my wife has always despised. We used to argue about it frequently, but in recent years, she seemed to have given up complaining. I thought we had reached some kind of understanding, that our life had settled into a steady rhythm. But then, one phone call shattered everything. I was overseas for work. Sometimes, Stephanie and I would video call. Other times, we'd just talk on the phone, depending on how busy she was. That day, she seemed occupied at home, so we started with an audio call. Nothing unusual. But then, she must have accidentally tapped something on her screen, because suddenly, the camera switched on. For a fraction of a second, I saw everything. My heart dropped. My brain went blank. Then I exploded. The phone was propped up, aimed directly at our bed. And there, lying comfortably, was a young, naked man, couldn't have been more than 25. Meanwhile, my wife, equally unclothed, was scrambling to pull her clothes on. I lost it. I was shouting so loudly. I'm surprised her phone didn't break from the sheer volume of my rage. But the guy, he didn't even flinch. He just smirked, completely unfazed, like this was some kind of joke. That only fueled my fury. Stephanie was crying, apologizing, scrambling for words. And then, this smug kid had the audacity to taunt me, saying if I was such a tough guy, I should come home and face him in person. Before I could respond, Stephanie must have figured out how to end the call, because the screen went black. Probably for the best. Who knows what else I might have said in that moment. But really what was left to say? The betrayal was obvious. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the kind of thing that could only be dealt with face-to-face. The problem? My business trip had just begun. I still had a full week before I could return home. I decided not to cut it short. What was done was done. I'd handle the mess when I got back. In the meantime, I wanted to find out exactly who this guy was. Tracking him down turned out to be easier than I expected. He clearly had an inflated ego, the kind of person who couldn't resist showing off. Sure enough, my instincts were right. His social media was filled with pictures flaunting his looks and lifestyle. He was 23, even younger than I thought. Scrolling through his posts, I noticed that he and Stephanie were connected online. That explained how they had met, or at least how they stayed in touch. Before flying back, I came up with a plan. I reached out to a female friend and asked if I could borrow her social media account for a bit. When I told her why, she didn't hesitate to help. Using her profile, I messaged a guy, pretending to be interested. I asked if he had a girlfriend. He replied, saying he did, but he was always open to no-strings-attached fun. Perfect. I set up a meeting with him at a nearby park, making sure it was in the evening, when it would be easier to catch him off guard. The moment I landed back home, I didn't go to my house. I went straight to that park. From a distance, I spotted him first. He hadn't noticed me yet. Even better, I approached, looking him in the eye. "Hey, aren't we supposed to have a date?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. He sneered. "Dude, I don't know what you're talking about. Get lost." Without missing a beat, I pulled out my phone and showed him the chat logs, the messages he thought were from a random woman. His face went pale as the realization hit. "How does it feel?" I said, my voice cold. "Knowing you've been messing with another man's wife." His reaction was instant. He tried to run, but I was faster. I grabbed his jacket before he could escape. He struggled, panicked, yelling for me to let go. Suddenly, the cocky attitude was gone. "Please, man, don't hit me. I have a big following online, sponsors," he stammered, practically begging. I barely heard his excuses. He was shaking. And for the first time since that disastrous phone call, I felt like I was finally back in control. I stand at 6 feet 2 inches with a solid build, while this kid couldn't have weighed more than 130 pounds dripping wet. I wasn't about to turn this into a full-blown spectacle or lower myself to his level, so I gave him a few well-placed but restrained punches, just enough to make my point. Still, I ended up breaking his nose. The scuffle attracted a small crowd from the park, so I released him, making sure he understood that he wasn't untouchable. Tracking him down had been ridiculously easy, and if he ever considered messing with another married woman, he'd do well to think twice. Before I walked away, I made him admit how long my wife had been cheating. Panic-stricken, he blurted out everything. She hadn't just been seeing him, but multiple other men, and she didn't even try to keep it a secret. Apparently, she had been sleeping around for a while, especially whenever I was away on business. That revelation hit me harder than any punch I could have thrown. Deep down, I knew he was telling the truth. His fear was too real for him to be making it up, according to him. My wife would call whenever she was in the mood, setting up her flings through a dating app. That was something I needed to see for myself. As soon as I got home, I put his claim to the test. I created a fake profile on the app, and within 10 minutes of chatting with a random woman, I found her, my wife. She was still at it. She had no hesitation about meeting up, acting as if she had been divorced for a while. No commitments, no baggage, no remorse. Even after I had literally caught her in the act, she hadn't stopped. Finally, I went home. We hadn't spoken since that disastrous video call, so she wasn't expecting me to walk in right then. The moment she saw me, she didn't bother with excuses or apologies. Instead, she just shrugged and said, "Do whatever you want. I'm not going to stop cheating. I just want a divorce." I was floored. Hurt didn't even begin to cover what I felt. My anger surged, and before I could think, I slapped her. I had never laid a hand on her before, but in that moment, I lost control. Then I told her to get out. I wanted nothing more to do with her. Instead of showing any regret, she smirked and mocked me, asking why she had even stayed married to me. Then she went for the kill. She said I was barely a man to her. She admitted she had never been sorry, not even for a second, that she had been unfaithful since the very beginning, that she only married me for my money. I saw red, my hands clenched into fists, but this time I stopped myself. Instead, I threw her out of the house wearing nothing but her bathrobe. She screamed, threatening to call the police if I didn't hand over her clothes and money. But at that point, I was too drained to care. An hour later, the neighbors called the cops, fed up with her shouting outside. When the officers arrived, I calmly explained what had happened. They listened, shook their heads, and wished me luck before leaving. Eventually, I tossed her coat and shoes out the door. She grabbed them and stormed off, to where I didn't know and I didn't care. The next morning, I hired a lawyer to make sure she got nothing. Legally, most of my assets had been mine before the marriage or inherited, so it wasn't difficult. Then she had the nerve to demand alimony, as if I should fund her lifestyle after all this. Even the judge seemed baffled. With no kids, she had no grounds for spousal support. She walked away with nothing. I have no idea where she is now, and frankly, I couldn't care less. That's the disaster I lived through, all because she got careless and slipped up, forgetting to cover her tracks. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that people like that always mess up eventually. And when the truth finally comes out, it cuts deep. But I'm free now, and that's all that matters.